Welcome to AP Euro for Winners.
Today we are continuing Unit 4 with talking about 18th century society and demographics.
All right, let's start with some context. So, the population of Europe, as we know, is growing, okay? It's growing a lot, but especially in the second half of the 1700s, the growth is significant, okay? And what are the causes of all this population growth? Well, the main cause is that there's a decline in the death rate because people are living longer lives. So, what is the main reason people are living longer lives? A lot of it comes down to food, okay? So, remember, we have the Columbian Exchange, which is introducing new foods to Europe. So the diets are going to be more varied. There's going to be more food because of the different types of foods that are coming in. We have better transportation systems with roads and canals, which gets the food to people easier. Food is stored better, so it lasts longer. And we have new technology and farming technology, right? That's going to increase crop yields. Besides food, there's also, this shouldn't be under food, but there's also inoculation and health. So this is kind of like vaccines. So they're starting to develop vaccines here. Okay. So the smallpox vaccine is going to reduce the mortality rate. So as you can see on the right, that boy pictured on the left, he has smallpox. Okay. And it was a very deadly disease at the time. And they've developed a way to vaccinate against it. Inoculation vaccine, same thing. Okay, they would basically scratch those sores and put them on their skin or inhale it through their nose. Okay, and Lady Mary Wortley Montagu is a British person. She's a British noble, and she travels to the Ottoman Empire, kind of discovers this, and kind of brings it back to Europe. And then Edward Jenner builds this into a more proper vaccine by the late 1700s. Okay, and also along with health, the bubonic plague pretty much disappears by now. The last outbreak was in France in like 1720. So health-wise, we're getting better. Okay, so population is growing because of a decline in death rate. People are living longer lives. The birth rate is not really going to be a significant factor. So most children are still going to be born from married women, but only half of only half of women are married at this time. There are some children born out of wedlock. These are seen as illegitimate children. We'll kind of talk about them a little bit later. The reason why the birth rate isn't going up so much, people are getting married later in life. And Britain and France are seeing the beginnings of birth control, which is going to decrease the number of children they're having in Western Europe.
All right, so let's look into some problems before the agricultural revolution. So the 1600s saw bad weather, low productivity, and small landholdings. There was this little ice age in between the 1500s and 1800s, which ruins crop yields during the worst of the weather. But if you look at this graph on the right, you'll notice that it fluctuates. It's not like it's cold the entire time. It goes cold, warm, cold, warm. It's enough to kill crops, but there are some warm periods within it. And we'll see that in the next slide. There's also a 3-field system, right? You leave one fallow and then leave the other crops rotating in the field. And then before that was able to keep pace with this increasing population. It was good, but now there's too many people. There's not enough food. Too many people living longer for this to work. And then we have small farms owned by individuals being a commonplace, but if those farms failed, it was huge trouble for the family, couldn't feed themselves. So here are those problems.
All right, so some solutions, and a lot of these should be review for us. Okay, so we'll go fast here. But the agricultural revolution is going to solve these problems. We're going to get more food. We're going to abandon that 3-field system, or there's a 2-field system. It's the same idea, right? There's no more fallow fields. Okay, we're going to instead grow other crops like clover. That's going to regenerate the nitrogen in the fields. Also, bonus of this is like, if you're growing clover, your livestock can graze in that areas, which is going to, obviously produce more food as well. So another way we're getting more food is the crop yields are going to go up, because in the late 1700s, even though we're still in a little ice age, the weather is getting better. And because we have that Columbian Exchange, potatoes and maize, corn are going to be easier to grow, and they're going to grow a lot of food. And lastly, more land is going to be used for cultivation. We have new technology. We've talked about this before. Jethro Tull's seed drill. It's going to make farming more efficient. It works best on large farms, though. And so we're going to see the commercialization of farms. And so we're going to see the removal of small family farms into big commercial farms, because small farmers can't compete. This is where we see the Enclosure Acts in England as a legal justification for the land seizure of the small farms, and again, bringing those into those large farms. This stuff is all review.
But A lot of what we're talking about is for focusing on Western Europe. So let's look at the Eastern European side. There's some delays there because serfdom in Eastern and Central Europe meant that progress is going to be slow and delayed. So serfdom, as a review, is a system of labor where unfree laborers, those who didn't own land, were tied to the land owned by their lord or noble. And they gave what they produced to those lords or nobles that owned them, right? So it didn't really work that well. Slow to change. Most people still lived in rural areas until the 1800s as well, so they're super reliant upon the serfdom system.
All right, so that was food, and so we're going to switch gears because this whole presentation is about society and demographics. So we're going to talk about family now, okay? And so one important thing to know about family is that the attitudes towards children change. So before the 1700s, children are kind of seen as like miniature adults. They need to work, they need to produce for the family. But as we get into the later 1700s, the influence of the Enlightenment, which we've talked about in the previous lesson, is going to mean that childhood is valued, especially in wealthy people. Okay, so they like the idea of childhood. This is when it comes up. So there's a philosopher, and you can see his book on the right, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He writes this book, Emile. I forgot the E in Emile. Okay, but anyway, he writes this book, Emile, and it's a book that promotes the education of children, right? Jean-Jacques Rousseau is an Enlightenment thinker. He believes in this idea of the social contract, which we've talked about before. Remember, the social contract is that citizens are responsible for governing themselves. They need to be responsible for the government. And if that's going to work, the children need to be educated so that they can do this when they become adults. Now, with that said, working class families are still going to need their children to work. So a lot of this change in how children are viewed is about the upper class, the elite. Okay. Another idea about family is that this is where we start to see the nuclear family become the norm. Okay. So the nuclear family, what we mean by that is like, your parents and the kids, that's who lives at the house. We're not talking about like aunties and uncles and grandparents living all together. Okay. Now, because of this, women and men are going to marry later in life because it takes money, right, to save up enough money to move out and all that kind of stuff. So women and men are going to get married later, like mid to late 20s, which for that time is later since the life expectancy is like 50 years old. So they're going to get married later, which is again going to decrease some of that birth rate in the Western places.
Right, let's focus on migration for a little bit. So the movement of people. Agricultural revolution meant that fewer workers are needed in the farms, right? So where are these people going to go? They still need work. Well, they move to the cities, and that's called urbanization, the movement of people to the cities. And then people are going to have issues from that in the cities because there's a lot of people, right? There's too many people in one small area. So there's not enough housing. We see the development of tenants, which are kind of like apartment buildings, but they're poor quality. There's no ventilation. There's a lot of diseases like tuberculosis flowing around. There's no indoor plumbing. It's pretty stinky. It's just not, doesn't seem like that great of a place to live.
People had to take their like toilet, like their basin, right, their chamber pot, and throw it out into the street. So that's why it was so stinky because they didn't have plumbing. And tuberculosis is an airborne disease. So like when there's no ventilation, there's often no windows in a lot of these tenement apartments. So the diseases spread really quickly.
And the urban poor meant that the whole city saw crime and prostitution on the increase because people need to make money, right? And they need money from someplace. So laws are going to be passed to eradicate these problems, such as England's Vagrancy Act of 1822, which is cracking down on prostitution. So again, because of all this stuff happening in the rural areas, people moving to the cities, urbanization, and then insert problems there. Here are the historical developments. There are a lot of them. Please read through them. Thank you for watching. We know a lot of this was a review, but there's some good new stuff to know. Shout out to our AP Euro students, and of course, see you all for the next video on 18th century culture and arts.
Until then, bye.